This is Renee Romeo, and today's project is how to make a round tablecloth. Now you'll see, I'm starting out here with an ugly old restaurant table base. I've made a custom top for it out of OSB and just cut it into a nice round circle. And all I'm really doing at this point is taking some decorator fabric and covering this because it'll never be seen, and this can almost be out of anything that you can imagine because no one's ever going to see it. So join me and I'll take you start to finish, sewing, assembling, ironing, and getting all of this back together so that you have a little destination spot of your own in your house. First thing we need to do is measure our table and make sure that we're going to have enough length of fabric to reach down to the floor on either side. So the way that I do this is with my little drawing. If this is the floor, I'm going to measure from the floor to the top of the table, across the table round, and then back down the other side to the floor. And when I come up and add up all of my measurements, it turns out to be 89 inches, and that's my finished length. But you can't cut your fabric at that length because you're going to need a little bit of extra fabric to turn under and make a nice hem all the way around. So I'm just simply going to add an extra inch to that length so that I get a ½ inch of extra fabric all the way around, and that's going to make for a ¼ inch hem all along that bottom edge. So my cut length then is going to be 90 inches, that's 89 plus the extra inch for 90 inches. So let's talk about how we come up with how much yardage we're going to require for our project. So I know that my cut length is 90 inches. A typical home decorator fabric is 54 to 60 inches wide. In my case, it's 54 inches wide. So I know that I'm not going to be able to go the entire 90 inches without a couple of seams. And so you'll see, here's my round. If I lay it out completely flat, I'm going to have a seam on the left side and on the right side to make up that 90 inches. So when you're measuring for fabric, I'm going to do a 90-inch piece for my main fabric, and I'm also going to purchase another 90 inches to do either side. The 90 inches will wind up taking care of any repeat that you have. If it's maybe within a 6-inch repeat, you can go ahead and you can just purchase the two 90-inch pieces. But in my case, I have a 27-inch pattern repeat. So if I have a flower here, that means that there's another flower that occurs here that's exactly the same, and there's 27 inches in between the middle of these two motifs. So I'm going to do 90 inches, another 90 inches that's going to be cut down the middle, down in half, so I can separate them and put them on either side, plus another 27 inches worth of fabric that I need to get my entire 90 inches. So I've measured the fabric, I come to 90 inches. I have a nice straight edge here, and let's talk about pattern for a second. You'll see my fabric has a giant all over pattern. Sometimes if you're working with fabrics like this, you might want to focus in on one motif, a flower, a leaf, whatever, and put that smack dab in the center of your table round. My table is just a little side table. It's not a dominant thing in the room. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this at 90 inches wherever that pattern started at the fabric store. That's what I'm going to go with. But if you'd like to, you can go ahead and center your motif in the middle of the table. So I've taken my straight edge and I've lined it up along the line where I see one motif and another motif, and I make sure that I have the very same section of that flower on one side and then the other side to make sure that I'm cutting this nice and straight across. Now, why do I care? This is a round and it really isn't going to matter, but if I were doing another project with the remainder of my fabric, I would want to make sure that I have a nice clean straight edge, and it makes for matching a little bit easier. So anyhow, I have my straight edge and I'm going to make a nice clean cut all the way across, and then I'll show you how to match fabric along each seam on each side to make this giant round. So now the way that I do this, it would have been pinned in place just temporarily while you cut it out. And then you can remove the pins again and you can fold it along this line that the manufacturer has stopped the printing at. And then we're going to fold it, and you'll see you're just going to line it up and try to match up all of these little areas of the motif so that everything is lined up pretty perfectly. And I'm just going to pin this in place, again, temporarily. This might take a little bit of manipulation depending on the kind of motif that you have, but as long as you get it close enough where you could kind of see I have a nice continuation of a line here, a nice continuation of a line here, and here as well. So from this point, I'm going to take an iron and I'm going to just go ahead and press this so that I have a nice stitching line when I go to move this to the back side, because you're going to be stitching on the back side. Okay, so I have these 3 pins in place. And you'll see what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and flip it to the back side, which will expose the raw selvage edge. And I'm going to take pins and I'm going to pin it on the back side because all fabric is sewn right sides together. Okay, and now that I have that done, I can go ahead and flip it to make sure that everything is going to line up properly, remove these pins, and then double check my work. So once that's all sewn, it'll line up perfectly along that seam line, and we're ready to go ahead and stitch. Now, you'll see here is the creased line, and this is on the back side, and this is the line that your needle is going to follow in your machine. Sometimes you can go ahead and follow along where that motif ends, where the actual printed fabric ends, but in this case you can't because you're going to be matching the seam. So line everything up, put your needle right into that crease, and go ahead and start stitching. And I always reverse. Anytime I start out a new stitch, I always reverse the stitch to hold it in place and go along that line all the way down the seam. And now that it's all pressed, look at this seam. It's a perfectly matched seam. Let's do the same thing on the other side. So you'll see I have these raw edges, and I'm just going to go ahead and fold one edge over and match up my motifs. Now what I can do, come in with a hot iron and press that. And then pin it. And again, we pin on the front side to begin with, and then we're going to fold it back onto itself in order to get the actual sewing surface. So we always sew from the back side with right sides together. And I could just go ahead and put a pin in place on the back side, and then I can remove the pins on the front. So you do that across the entire length of that seam and double check it, and it's going to turn out just great, and bring it over the machine. So I have all of the seams pressed out nice and flat on the back, and I'm working on the back side right now. And basically what I have is I have the 1/2 strip, the full strip, and the other half strip completely sewn together. And what I need to do is I need to find the very center of this center strip of fabric so that I can crease it and make the actual round. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to have these seams match up along the edges. So you can see on the back side here, here's my seam and here's my other seam. I'm simply going to line those up so that I can fold the middle section of the fabric onto itself. All right, so now that I have this fabric folded over, the seams are right above and below one another, so everything is nice and even in the lengthwise direction. From this point, I've taken a piece of cardboard and I've taped it down to my craft table. And I have a seam in the cardboard, so there's a flap, and I've taken it and I've put it over the edge of the table and taped it down really well, so it's laying at an angle on the edge of the table. I have a pin with a ball head, and I've inserted it into the cardboard right on that edge of the table, so it's in there nice and secure. From that point, I've cut a piece of string. The piece of string is about 50 inches long, and I've tied a loop on one end, and I'm going to slip that loop over the top of the ball of the pin head. Then I'll go ahead and take a cloth tape measure, put it up to the head of the pin, and measure out 45 inches along one length, which is right here. Now 45 inches is half of the 90 inches that I need, and since this fabric is folded onto itself, it's folded in half, so 45 is the measure that I need in order to make that circumference all the way around. What I'm going to do is pull the string nice and tight, and I'm going to line it up with the 45-inch mark, and then I'm going to take a marker and put a nice mark right onto that string. Now what that's going to do, it's going to give me the measurement all the way around, and I can go ahead and I can mark this fabric nice and tight, and that way it'll be a perfect circle. In order to do that, what I need to do is I need to fold this lengthwise to find the very center of the table. And I'm going to do that by lining up the selvage edge here on one side and getting it right here. So now I know my very center mark is right here at the fold. And I'm going to take another pin and I'm going to mark that. And now I can line this pin on the fabric up with this pin on the table. And that's perfect. And then I can line this folded edge up with the edge of the table to make sure everything is square and nice and even. All right, and that's perfect. So from this point, what I'm going to do, I'll put a few pins in to the cardboard through the fabric just to make sure everything's being held in place as I move that string across the fabric and mark it. At this point, I've gone ahead and grabbed a Sharpie marker. The reason why I do that is because it's a very busy fabric and I really need to see it, and it's kind of hard to see some of the other markers that you might use and get from your local fabric store. They disappear over a period of time, but they're very, very light. So I'm going to use this, and basically what I'm going to do, I'll put my finger about a ½ inch away from the mark on the string. I'll pull it nice and tight, and then I'll get in there with my Sharpie marker and I'll just go ahead and make a mark. Okay, so this mark that I'm making, I'm basically going to just keep moving it around, and I'll put a mark maybe every 3 inches or so, and that will give me a nice series of dots that I can just take my scissors and cut through both pieces of fabric all the way around, and it'll give me a perfectly round circle. Okay, so let's go ahead and take all of this off so that we can move the fabric around and I can actually get in there and cut out the circle. And I'm simply following dot to dot to dot as I cut. Okay, after you're done cutting out your circumference, then you can go ahead and start pressing the bottom edge in place. And basically all I do here is I just take the fabric and fold it over about 1/4 inch and then press it in place. And I'm going to do this twice. So basically I'll go around the entire circumference once, with this, and then I'll come back and I will fold it back over onto itself again so that I have just a nice 1/4 inch hem. And as you go, you can pin this in place. You're going to be stitching on the top side of this to make a beautiful hem on the outside, and you won't get any of that ruffling if you keep it, you know, at this width, 1/4 inch. Okay, so you have everything pressed into place, and this is what the back side looks like. And you're going to just slip it underneath your presser foot and go ahead and put in about a little less than a 1/4 inch seam there. You're just going to go ahead and you're going to back up your needle again and follow along the guides to the right hand side to make sure that you're going to have your stitching all nice and even along that bottom edge. The tablecloth is pressed. Everything hangs beautifully all the way down to the floor. So if you have a round table around your house that you would like to give a makeover, or if you'd like to go ahead and just make one and cover it in an unusual size, don't be afraid, because now you can make a tablecloth to cover and it'll look just gorgeous, like a beautiful decorator piece. So this project only took me 2 hours start to finish, and I've really created a wonderful spot to have afternoon tea, read a book, whatever. It's in the corner of my master bedroom. It's just the right size for this space, and that's what I really created with this project, is a very custom piece. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope to bring you another great project in the future. This is Renee Romeo. Thank you so much for watching.